Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha here with the class combination tier list for Grim Dawn. Now, you already know the rules, so we'll launch right into the A tier. Now, the A tier offensive combination is Nightblade Necromancer. Now, the primary reason why this is A tier and not S tier is because, unlike the Occultist Nightblade combination, which offers a huge amount of self-enhancing damage buffs, you have all of the Nightblade's buffs, plus you have Slail's Witchfire, which combos really well with the Nightblade, especially Execution. You don't have that option with the Necromancer. You do have the resistance reduction of Vitality with Spectral Wrath, you do have the increased Vitality damage in Harbinger of Souls, and there is quite a bit of overlap with the Anatomy of Murder, which remains useful here, boosting the vitality and bleeding damage of Siphon Souls and Blood Boil primarily, but also being able to boost Necrotic Edge, Drain Essence in its whole chain, Reaping Strike, even Ravenous Earth, which also has the benefit of being able to do poison and acid damage. So if you wanted to do a poison acid focused build instead of a vitality one, you absolutely have that option. It is available to you. So, mostly through the lack of ability of enhancing the damage output of the class combination as much as the Occultist offers, this is a 2.5 on offense. Defensively, it is also only a 2.0. You'll remember that the Occultist Nightblade combination was a 2.5. This is a 2.0. First off, we have lost the damage absorption that Possession offers from Occultist, so that's rather inhibiting. Second off, there is mostly just plain old self-heal here from damage, which is fine, but again, it's not as good as preventing the damage, and it's also not necessarily the straight-up self-activatable heal that you would normally have. It is specifically draining, whereas the Occultist at least offered the triggerable heal of Blood of Dreeg, which meant you didn't have to rely on damaging an enemy to drain that life. Here, no matter what you do, you're relying on the enemy not being resistant to vitality, essentially, in order to drain life from them. And as you can probably tell by this point, that is somewhat problematic. So, from that particular perspective, the drain life here isn't quite as effective as the Occultist's heals are, because the Occultist has a few more non-enemy reliant heals. So it is only a 2.0 on the defense. For coordination, this is only 1.5. As I pointed out, the poison and acid and the vitality damage crossover is really nice, and even the bleeding. But there is no aether damage crossover, and of course, anything involving pets is not really going to combo well with the Nightblade, because again, the Nightblade does not interact with pets at all. So there is that mild issue here. Also on the defensive, I didn't mention this, but some people will mention that Mark of Torment does offer some damage absorption, but you have to keep in mind that it's only 5 seconds of 50% damage absorption. This is really meant to reflect the damage. This isn't really intended to prevent it, and you're still taking 50% of that, and again, it's only over a 5-second period. There are items that can make this better, yes, that is absolutely true, but not by enough to really make this match up to the level of healing and the level of constant absorption that the Occultist offers. But I just wanted to mention that really quick, because I know some people will mention that there are a couple of ways that you can prevent enemies from attacking you, like through Ill Omen, or reducing their various forms of damaging you with this. Decomposition here is really nice. You've got Grave Chill to help keep melee enemies away from you at the very least, but that's really about it. Now, you do have the boost from Dread and the Confuse on Dread, yes, but this is a very narrow, this particular boost in damage only really affects Bone Harvest specifically. You can get a boost to Cold and Vitality with Soul Harvest, but Soul Harvest is really intended for pets, so unless you're building pets, it's not going to be fully effective, and as I stated before, with the 1.5 coordination here, as I was in the middle of talking about, you really are looking to get away from pets here, because Nightblade interact with them at all. So coordination here is pretty small. It is only 1.5. You can essentially go for poison acid damage output, vitality output, and that's primarily it. There's not a whole lot of leeway here, at least not without specific items. In versatility, it is also going to really be, it's going to be a 1.5 here. You can sort of, if you wanted to brute force a hybrid pet personal build without any items, it's not easy, and it's not something I would recommend, especially if you're a new player, but you can do it. So the versatility here is going to stay at a 1.5. You can brute force that. You would, of course, have the two pure damage builds, focusing on either poison acid or vitality, bringing in aether or vitality, whichever one you don't choose, as a sort of sub-damage type. You also have the various damage types of Nightblade, the pierce primarily there. So yeah, while the offense here is 2.5, the defense is 2.0, the coordination and the versatility are both 1.5, just because of the clash between the Necromancer's pet skills and how the Nightblade typically operates. So, with that being said, what is the A-tier defensive combination? Now, this is going to surprise some more experienced players, but hear me out. Occultist, not our Shaman, Occultist Arcanist. Now, again, we're looking at kind of mimicking the Menhir's Will combination with Maven's Sphere of Protection plus the Possession. At least in theory, you can pull this for the same level of 13% damage absorption. The reason why this is A tier rather than the S tier that the Soldier Arcanist combination is first off, obviously, Possession does not boost the healing of the class like Menhir's Will does. Not Menhir's Will, Menhir's Bulwark. That increases healing effects. It gives you extreme health regeneration. 85 health a second is nothing to sneeze at. And furthermore, you don't have quite as many actual just plain old survivability type abilities. You have a self-heal on Sigil of Consumption, you have a manual heal on Blood of Dreeg, and you have the heal on the Crow. The damage absorption we've already covered, but that's basically it in terms of surviving, in terms of sustainability of this combination. So it's not got the shield benefits that the Soldier has. It doesn't have the just huge amounts of health boost it has. It doesn't have field command. It doesn't have as many different ways of preventing enemies from attacking you. I believe Eye of Dreeg has a confuse, stun/confuse chance. I am not 100% sure how high that gets. This is, I believe, a 15, almost 15. It's 14%. Not great. It's the only real method it has to prevent people from consistently attacking you. There is, of course, well, this doesn't increase your defensibility. This increases your output. But ultimately, yeah, there are fewer options of keeping enemies off of you. There is less straight defense increases. So this is only a 2.5 on the survivability of this combination. The Occultist still has enough self-heal in various forms to make up to some extent for the loss of the soldier's defensive stats, defensive abilities, defensive passives, really. But not quite enough. However, in exchange, the offense of the class does shoot up to a 2.5. You do have the percentage damage output of Bloodied Pox. You do have quite a few nifty little increases, a couple of buffs that you can apply to the Arcanist that the Soldier doesn't have access to. For example, Storm Spirit will boost most of your Arcanist damage, because no matter what you do with the Arcanist, even if you're doing this, which does fire and aether, or this, which does fire and aether and eventually lightning, you're still doing elemental damage. So it does offer you more damage output potentially than the Soldier did. Also, additionally, if you really wanted to, you could go into Fabric of Reality and do an interesting Aether Chaos-focused build, which can work really well, and actually will carry you through if you can set up a really nice build focusing on Fabric of Reality. You can do a really clean job of getting through most of the main campaign and Malmoth without that much difficulty. You would have mild hiccups anywhere there wasn't necessarily Chthonic or Ethereals, but even then, it's just because your damage output isn't being boosted by like 12%. I believe it ends up at 12%. Yes, it does. Your damage just isn't being boosted by 12% against the typical enemies. The villains of the piece, so to speak. But yeah, this is a 2.5 on offense, a 2.5 on defense. It does both pretty well. Not quite as well as the hyper-specialization of the soldier, or even the hyper-specialization of the damage output of Occultist Nightblade. But it is a really strong, balanced build in that particular aspect. In terms of coordination, it is a 2. Now, it's not 2.5 because there is not a whole lot of pet overlap between the two, and to some extent there is going to be some moments where, you know, if you're going with, say, someone familiar, then you're going to be going mostly into Arcanist. Most of your damage output is going to come from Arcanist, not the Occultist. And then again, if you decide to go into Slayer's Witchfire and Possession, then most of your damage output is going to be here, and you'll probably be building Tainted Power to make this into Delicious Chaos and Vitality. And at that particular point, then you're doing Fire, Chaos, and Vitality, and you could do a really interesting little combo here of, if you really want to go down this road, just using these abilities here, and then pulling in the Hellhound and Sigil of Consumption. It's just a little fun play you can do that kind of merges both. It's an interesting time, but if you're going into, say, Slayer's Witchfire and Possession, you're probably at minimum taking this and maybe nothing else. Obviously, you'll be taking Inner Focus just for the Delicious Spirit and offensive ability, but otherwise, you might take Mental Alacrity as well for the energy casting speed and skill energy cost. Maybe. That would be really helpful with this. You could take these skills and then focus completely on Occultist the rest of the way. Actually, one of my favorite builds of all time happens to be... Hold on, let me show you this for a second. This happens to be one of my favorite setups. We bring this up here. This up here. And we just... If you want a really interesting... This is just a little fun thing you can do. For a magical time. Go all the way here. And then at this point, you can either choose to go all the way to Possession, which is up to you, or you can go into Reckless Power. You could absolutely do Reckless Power, go into Kalidor's Tempest, oops. Or Alexa's Flash Freeze also works really well. Grab Maven's Sphere, and then with your last 9 points, you can throw them really anywhere you want to. Whatever you want, particularly. You could drop any of these. You could go into, for example, you could drop Reckless Power, you can drop Fabric of Reality. You can go into an equally interesting idea of Pure Chaos and Vitality. And you can just go in here, blast this all the way up, grab Possession, and grab most of Dreeg here. And then you're getting some really just sweet and interesting time here. Retaliation damage, which isn't really that big of a deal. If you really want to, you don't have to. What I usually do with this combination is Doombolt, going ahead and slap in the last points into conversion, and then I'll just throw in 3 into Fabric of Reality just for a mild chaos boost. But you can see the various kinds of fun things that you can do with that combination. It is a fairly interesting time, but I did kind of go off on a tangent because it is a really fun time. I love this combination so much just to play with. Uh, this is the combination I cracked my teeth on theory crafting, which is different from improving. But this is the class combination I used for my first theory craft, and it was a really great time. But ultimately, yeah, you can absolutely do that. 2.5 offense, 2.5 defense. Coordination is a 2.0. And actual versatility is a 2.5 as well. It does fall a little bit in the coordination simply because there is some amount of disparity here. For example, going into Aspect of the Guardian, Arcanist isn't going to get any benefit from that, except for Mirror of Arioctes. If you go into Slael's Witchfire, only the Albrecht's Aether Ray is going to get any benefit from that, for example. So, there is a certain amount of friction there between the two classes, but not enough really to mitigate the potential effectiveness of it if you wanted to go into the combination. There's all kinds of really interesting ways you can utilize this combination. I just showed you some of my favorite ways, and I showed you like 3 just starter builds, just rough ideas. From there, you probably saw another 3 combinations right there, and I can name them if I really wanted to, but I want to keep this video at least roughly half an hour. I don't want to spend the full 45 minutes to an hour that the last one was, because you have already got the rules. So I'm going to leave, the various other potential possibilities alone for now. But you can see where this is a really great and effective build, and this is really what I go for with theory crafting, kind of warm myself up again before I get back in there into theory crafting. I love this combination. What about the next best in terms of coordination? What is the A tier coordination class? Well, that's a bit interesting, but the next in terms of coordination is actually Occultist Necromancer. You probably already have figured out why. You have all of this self-heal, you've got the ability to boost the vitality and poison and acid damage of the Necromancer very easily through just possession. Everything here, everything that the Occultist does, except for the pets, transfers so cleanly over to the Necromancer, and the pets themselves transfer so cleanly as well if you go with a pet build. So basically, it is a 2.5 in coordination, obviously, but you can do either a pet build, and there's seamless coordination between the two, or you can go with a personal build, almost seamless coordination. There's a bit of a sticking point with Blood Harvest. You can't really boost the cold damage of Blood Harvest. Well, with pets you can, but you can't really boost the damage of Bone Harvest with the personal build, and expect that to work, because the solo build, when focusing on you, doesn't build pets, doesn't boost cold damage, and doesn't boost pierce. And quite frankly, even though it does do plenty of vitality damage, rather than take this and boosting only 1/3 of its damage output, why wouldn't you take Ravenous Earth, where you're boosting 2/3, or Siphon Souls, where you're boosting one of the two, or heck, Drain Essence, where you're boosting one of the two? There's just better options for that. So yeah, it is a 2.5 on the coordination here. The offense also is 2.5. Again, we do have the Occultist carrying most of the weight of boosting the damage types, or alternatively, they share the boosting of the pets. But yeah, the offense is 2.5. They both have percentage of health damage abilities. They both have some pretty great offensive options. There's a lot of life drain, but you do have the security of Blood of Dreeg as well, or the Crow if you're going with a pet build. So defense is only a 2. You have to keep in mind that the only damage absorption available is on possession, and if you're doing a pet build, that also fades away, because if you're doing a pet build, you're going to want Master of Death, which does not offer you any damage absorption at all. So there is that So defensively it is a 2, offensively it is a 2.5, coordination obviously is 2.5, and furthermore, actual coordination, versatility here is a 2. You can do really well with a personal build or really well with a pure pet build, but you can't really do the same thing with Shaman where you can kind of mix the two. Actually, this is a really clean segue into the A tier versatility build, which is Necromancer Shaman. Now, similar principle here as with the Shaman Occultist. You can build pretty much any way you want and have it be pretty effective, but in the Shaman's case, rather than with the Occultist, it was always about the vitality. With both options, with Occultist Shaman and Occultist Necromancer, you're really leaning hard on that vitality in most of your builds. There are exceptions. Here with the Shaman Necromancer, you're really leaning into that bleeding in that cold damage to some extent, because you can increase the amount of cold damage the enemies are taking with Raging Tempest here. And of course you can boost cold damage through Stormcaller's Pact, which is a fairly interesting time. So you can in fact focus on the cold damage of Necromancer and have a really interesting experience rather than having to go into the vitality, which you still can do utilizing Harbinger of Souls and going into the vitality / bleeding shaman skills. But you could also instead go into Stormcaller's Pact and focus on the cold damage here. You can convert the Aether damage of Drain Essence into cold damage if you really want to. Which could also do which could allow you to do an interesting Vitality Cold Thunder type build if you have the items for it. If you're lucky enough to get certain items on your journey. You can, of course, always benefit from Siphon Souls, which again you can. Well, no, this is the reverse of what you want. I thought this changed the vitality to cold. It changes it to Aether. Pardon me. Slip of the mind. But you can see definitely where you have all kinds of interesting options. You can do the hybrid build, of course, with the Shaman. You can go with the Primal Bond, get that bleeding damage, grab Siphon Souls for the bleeding damage, and then go into the Blight Fiend. Probably would be your best bet because Primal Bond doesn't increase all damage types, so you can do skeletons if you really wanted to, but you can see how nice and versatile this is. Almost as versatile as the Occultist, almost, but not quite. The Occultist does do a bit more damage types. It's not really, and I personally feel that it can do hybrid builds, the half pet, half personal, a little bit better than Shaman Necromancer can, but it's a pretty close race between Shaman Necromancer and Shaman Occultist. The offense here is going to be just like with the other one, 2.5 here, because you do have the percentage of health damage. You do have all these different ways you can boost the damage, but then there's only a couple of from each side. No, I think it would actually be more logical and reasonable to put this at a 2.0 for offense. I'm going to rechange that. Thinking about it, the only boost for any of these builds is an ultimate skill. There isn't really a boost beyond that, unless you're going with pets, and even then that's a very specific build. So, or pet personal hybrid. So I'm going to put this offense at a 2.0. This is also going to be a 1.5 for survivability. While you do have all of this self-heal, you have a little bit of health and armor increase. You do have the spectral binding that increases health as well. It is somewhat difficult to necessarily be defensive with this class and to have all these survivability options, because again, a lot of your self-heal is tied up in vitality and damage inflicting abilities. So it is a little tough to heal yourself in most cases if the enemy is Chthonian or otherwise has some form of vitality resistance. So you do kind of want to be careful about that. So defensively it is only 1.5. In coordination, it is also going to be at 2.0. You probably have figured out why. You've got some decent overlap for the vitality, you've got some decent overlap for the cold damage, you've got some decent overlap for the bleeding damage, and you've got a good time for the pets, either complete pet or half pet. But whatever choice you make, whatever damage you focus on, is going to cut out certain options. For example, if you decide to focus on the cold damage, you're pretty much not going to look at Ravenous Earth because there's not enough here to reward you for building into that. You're not going to be looking into Siphon Souls because, again, there's not enough reward there. You're pretty much just going to go all the way up to, you're going to use Drain Essence, you're going to get Grave Chill, you're going to go to Decomposition, and you're pretty much going to stop there. You're going to grab possibly Spectral Wrath, maybe, if you want to splash that vitality damage in there, because after all, consider that this is lightning and bleeding damage, and it goes all the way to more lightning damage. There's bleeding damage on this as well. Physical bleeding, physical lightning bleeding. This does bleeding and lightning and internal trauma. So you can do kind of this weird vitality and lightning overlap at the bleeding. It's possible. But again, it depends on what you want to build, what items you happen to pick up along the way. And you'll also notice that there is, this has 2.5, this has 2.5, whatever. A tier is fairly consistent. The difference between S tier and A tier is that because I rate these classes in categories, in 4 categories, the S tier just represents the peak of each of these stats. You may have noticed that particularly with the Oathkeeper Demolitionist combo I mentioned in the S tier, where their coordination was at an all-time high. You can't beat it for coordination. But their versatility was only 1.5. So they don't necessarily represent the absolute peak of what a build is, because what you feel is the absolute peak of what a build is depends upon how you want to play, or how you play, or how you feel. For example, if you are the absolute most hyper-aggressive of players, the S tier's Nightblade Occultist combo, beautiful, perfect, it's absolutely right up your alley. But what if you're the kind of person that likes to have an answer to every question, and you really want to do a sort of coordinated effort? Well, maybe then you're looking at something else. Maybe you're looking at something a little bit more balanced, and in that case you're looking at maybe Occultist Arcanist, or maybe you're looking at Nightblade Necromancer, which sacrifices a little bit of the pure defense or offense of an S tier counterpart in exchange for a little bit more damage or a little bit more versatility. So the A tier is what I consider the most consistently useful. The S tier represents the peak of each of the 4 stats that I rate a class combination by, but the A tier is what I consider the most consistently useful. When I'm playing with family, I'm typically picking an A tier combination most of the time, because I can sit down and I know it'll be pretty effective, consistently effective, and I don't have to worry about my equipment. I don't have to worry about whether or not it will work well with the others, because it probably will. For example, I'm going to take a random example using the Versatility class here. Say I was playing with my 2 cousins and my mother, right? And so in this particular case, I would probably want to play either the Occultist Shaman or the Shaman Necromancer, depending on what they were. If one of them grabbed Occultist, then I would want to go with Shaman Necromancer, and I would want to grab Spectral Binding and Spectral Wrath so I can increase their vitality damage that they're dealing out, and simultaneously increase my physical damage output. I could go with eventually Harbinger of Souls and do a vitality focused, aether focused Shaman Necromancer if my family members were building a lot of potential vitality damage output. Or I could go full pets. If nobody else was going full pets, I could do a 100% full pet build. Or if somebody else is doing a 100% full pet, I could go hybrid pet. I could do some me, summon my pets. Do a kind of hybrid with the Primal Spirit Shaman skill, the Primal Bond, not Primal Spirit, Primal Bond. Go hybrid. You know, get my good old Briarthorn, who will boost the damage of all of my allies' pets, and then I could theoretically I could still get Spectral Wrath if I really wanted to. I could get the Skeletons, I could get the Soul Harvest to boost my minions. There's all kinds of things I could flex into this combination. I could also do that with the Occultist as well if I really wanted to. It would really depend on what my allies were picking. But as an example of kind of the difference there, since the Occultist, as you've noticed, is fairly instrumental in some of the more powerful builds just because of its diversity and yet simultaneous focus in on a single or on a couple of concepts, key concepts, that Occultist is a popular pick, and obviously my family picks Occultist decently often. So this is something I might respond to kind of flex out a little bit and adapt for them. So that's really what the A tier is about. The S tier is kind of like the B tier is basically weaker versions of the A tier. They're consistent, but they're not quite as good in their respective fields. So that's what you can really expect out of the B tier. The C tier is, at that point, for the C tier, at that point, you're looking to challenge yourself. Not a bad thing. It can work, absolutely. Again, it depends on how lucky you are with your items. But when you go into the C tier, you're sitting down, you're saying to yourself, I want to challenge myself. I'll take this combo. Okay. F tier is, you know what? I need a fresh run that's going to really push me to my limits. That's F tier. F tier will push you. With that being said, thank you all very much for joining me. And if you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, issues, please leave them in the comments below. I do read them. And thank you all very much for joining me. Have a great 24 hours.